Hi guys, I'm Linda.
And I'm Vicky.
And we are Partners in Crime. Today we're going to do our wine segment, and we do have a Pinot Noir called Dark Horse. So we're going to try this. We do like Pinot Noir. Do you like that?
I do.
I think that's a little bit sweeter.
Yeah, I do.
Than some of the other.
And I believe this is a California wine.
Yes.
Very good.
Yes, it is a little bit sweeter than some of the other reds.
That's why I would like it.
Yeah, but it's
not too sweet.
Really good.
It's just a little sweetness
just
to
a little bit. Just a little bit. So, yeah, so I guess Dark Horse, we could definitely recommend to our viewers. And today we are going to dive into Cold episode 7.
No, it's...
Oh, it's 8. I apologize. 8. Wearing a wire. We did 7 last time.
Yeah.
So this takes place with Josh moving to Washington after everything kind of dies down. They still haven't found Susan. So Josh did start going back to church when he was in Washington. He was in the Gem Heights ward, they call it. When he was up there, he did start having the boys go to Sunday school. It's called primary school. And Charlie's teacher was Crystal Lewis. Charlie was being a little rambunctious and started doing something, flicking on the light switch off and on. And the teacher said, "You better stop doing that or I'm going to tell your mom and dad," because she didn't realize who Charlie's parents actually were. And when she said that to him, Charlie said, "My mom's dead." And that really made Crystal stand back, and then she did wind up finding out who.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting because, the majority, I believe, of this episode has to do with the sister Jennifer Graves. And apparently after they moved to Washington, after Josh and his boys moved to Washington to be with his father, her suspicions of him grew even more.
Right.
And he moved from his West Valley, Utah home to his father's house, which was in South Hill, Washington.
Okay.
And like Linda said, for some reason, upon moving, he seemed to have found faith again by becoming a member of that particular ward. But, he always had an ulterior motive, rather, for whatever he was doing. And he did introduce himself to the bishop of that ward and ended up getting money for food because he told him he couldn't buy food.
Work. Yeah.
And he couldn't work. And, they kept him on their list for any kind of help that he needed, which they did give him. We'll get into that. Jennifer Graves is the sister. She was very suspicious of him from the beginning. And like I said, after they moved, it even made her more suspicious because he gave up that home. It was their marriage home. And
he just seemed to walk away.
He walked away, and when he did that, Susan's father, Charles, had said he was convinced then that Josh knew that she wasn't going to return to that home. So, in reviewing this episode, it had to do a lot with Jennifer's efforts to try to get her brother, to try to get her brother to confess or admit or say where she is. And she came up with an idea.
Right.
And the idea was to wear a wire.
She asked. She was the one that initiated that with the police.
She did. And at first they weren't they weren't really receptive to that idea. But she had a relationship with some of the detectives, and she got to Ellis Maxwell, who he liked the idea.
Right.
He thought it was a great idea.
I think because they didn't really know she was his family member, they were concerned that she might have ulterior motives to want to do this. So that's why they were worried that she might be doing this to maybe exonerate Josh.
Right.
So, but Ellis was the one that really believed in her.
Right. So eventually, they had a team meeting to create the program, right, for, I don't know what else to call it, for what she would do, how she would do it, how she would proceed, what their role is, what they were hoping her role would be. And they took it from there. She was wired up, and she went to the home. She went
in Washington.
She went to Steve Powell's home. And even that, for her, was a little bit surprising because she really didn't have much of a relationship with them anymore.
No.
She was pretty much estranged from them. So when she appeared, they were all surprised.
Right, and she was concerned that they probably suspected something when her and her husband showed up.
Right.
So that was scary for her.
Yeah. But it was one of the boys' birthdays.
Yes, they were celebrating. I don't know which one. They were born close to. So,
that was a good excuse for her. She got there, she played with the boy, she even had a birthday present. So, maybe they lessened their suspicions at that time, but she had dinner with them. I believe it was pork chops that they had for dinner. And, after dinner is when things started to escalate. She got Josh alone.
Yes.
And when she got him alone, she pretty much confronted him. What did you do with her? You need to admit to me. I'm your sister. I need to know. And, he was his usual Josh self.
And you don't seem concerned about your wife and what's going on.
Right. And he was like, I didn't do anything to her, I don't know what you're talking about.
It sounded just like his
usual.
Yeah, when he was talking to the police and they were questioning him, that's exactly the way it sounded. And we do hear audio from those tapes.
Yeah, because she was wired and it was recorded.
Yeah.
And she, asked him where he was those 18 hours that are unaccounted for after he rented the car. And he said, I wasn't anywhere. He wasn't anywhere for 18 hours.
Drove around for 18 hours. We do that all the time.
So, she couldn't get anywhere with him. And the brother, Michael, was eavesdropping on their conversation. And he conveyed that information to his father, Steve. So Steve quickly interrupted them and told Josh to go get the birthday cake.
Yeah.
So this is where things really escalated because Steve confronted Jennifer with, how could you say that about your brother? He didn't do anything to her. How could you say that? And they had a huge argument. And
this was after Josh had left. With his brothers.
After Josh had left. So he called her psychotic. She accused him of coming on to Susan. I mean, it was just a huge confrontation.
And it's so unfortunate because this poor girl, this is his daughter, yet he's totally, what is it called? He's defending his son. Everything points to his son being the one that did something with his wife, and he's not even concerned. She said the whole time that they were there, they really didn't even talk about Susan until she brought it up.
Right. There was no mention of her at all, which is such a shame. And, of course, there was no phone call from her. It was the boy's birthday. There was nothing. So at that point, she really knew that Susan was gone.
Right.
Steve ended up throwing her out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was fighting with her and calling her names, Jennifer's husband kind of stood up for her. And,
Yeah, Kirk.
Yeah, he said, how can you do this? How can you
How
say
can you
this?
talk to your daughter like that?
Right. So,
Yeah.
you know, she, on the way out and they were driving home, she really broke down.
Yeah.
And, of course, Kirk asked her, are you all right?
Mm-hmm.
She just lost it and said no, and he killed her.
Yeah.
She was very emotional at that
Very,
point.
yes.
That, oh my God, she said, he killed her.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she could see it in his eyes.
Yeah.
When she was talking to him.
She could just tell.
So, and, you know, she knew her brother.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was a shame. Nothing came out of that. She tried her best, and it just did not go anywhere. She felt like a failure.
Yeah. Before all of this happened, Josh did want to move his stuff from his house in Utah to Washington. He did ask for help from his neighbors. Apparently, he's the one that gets to dictate what everybody does, and he just stands back and doesn't do any work. Everybody else does it.
Right.
So his one neighbor, Wendy, I believe is her name. Mm-hmm. She was a daughter of their neighbors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she was saying how there were all of these buckets down in the basement, like 5-gallon bins of like food, like peanut butter, and she's like, oh my gosh, what they didn't go hungry for sure, but she noticed something on the kitchen floor, and Josh was like, oh, that's blood. Oh, I'll have to clean it up before the police get here. And then he was putting something in the car, and he said, oh, I just put Susan's head in the car. Like, he's just really horrible.
Yeah.
With his, your wife still hasn't been found missing.
You're making these jokes.
Yeah.
It was just horrible.
And, you know, she just, and he kept egging her on. He wanted her to engage, and she kind of just shut him down.
Right.
So
right.
It was, and then asking these people to help and then just not doing anything is just total Josh.
Yeah, and apparently there were a few other drums, I guess they are, or barrels, that he wouldn't let anybody touch.
Yeah.
He had to move them with Michael.
Mm-hmm.
So
what they were, who knows?
Who knows what that is?
There was like a substance that Wendy said was near one of the bins downstairs, and she said it kind of looked like a chemical. So she did have some tape, and she blotted up part of the blood and then part of this chemical.
Right.
Right. And they didn't find anything. There wasn't any of Susan's blood or anything.
No, she turned it over to the police, and you know, they didn't know it was blood. They just didn't know what it was.
Right.
And they tested it, and didn't turn up to be anything.
It's just his sense of humor is just so,
Oh, God.
I mean, inappropriate is not even,
right.
You know, doesn't really even explain how bad it is to talk like that. But
right. Now, even when he got to Washington, he had called, I believe it was the bishop of the church, said he needed help unpacking. And they met him at his storage unit that he got there. And it was the same thing. He stood around, he did nothing. Everybody else was doing things. It turns out that I guess it was the bishop, was also in law enforcement.
yes, he worked for the Postal Service.
Right. And, you know, he had his eye on Josh. He was, you know, he first of all, he was fed up with him because Josh was being so lazy.
Yeah.
He said a couple times he just handed things to Josh.
Right. And he would just put them down.
Right. But, you know, he said if he found anything, he would have gone right to the correct.
He would have stopped everything.
And gone to the, you know, the right division. Because
we are also doing a video on Mark and Lori hacking. And it is very, not strange, but
coincidental,
yes, that Lori Hacking actually worked at the same Wells Fargo investment company, and some of Susan's coworkers actually worked with Lori Hacking.
Right. They knew them both.
Right. And what brought this to our attention was in this episode, they do talk about, because I don't really remember this, this case. They talk about this case, and Josh is like, well, he screwed up. Mark Hacking screwed up because he lied to the police too many times.
Right.
And Ellis Maxwell is saying he was part of that investigation as well. Everyone in that area knew about it. It was in 2004, I believe.
Right.
And he said, Josh was right. He actually understood what he did wrong. Mm-hmm. So Josh, that's why he doesn't say much.
Right.
It's crazy too, when Josh did move back to Washington, when he was going to church, he did eventually leave, he wanted people or kids to play with his boys. But nobody wanted their kids to play with the boys. It was a shame for the boys because the president of the ward was saying they just didn't want to deal with Josh.
Right.
And knowing what happened and what could have happened, they just didn't want to have their kids around him. So they did have Pierce County in Washington could talk to the boys. So they did have someone go out to Steve's house to talk to them. And Detective Teresa Berg went into the home, and the boys came running to her and hugged her. It's so sad. They obviously really needed some attention. They needed emotional support. And the detective said every time they would go in the house, it was just so cold. Like the whole atmosphere was cold.
Right. It seemed like Charlie was prepped for any kind of questioning. Mm-hmm. Because he would say things like, I don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And it's a secret. And, he just was, quiet about everything. He just wouldn't talk about it. And it made several attempts to get him to talk, and he just wouldn't.
Yeah, he kept saying he couldn't talk about Susan or camping. But the one time they questioned him, he said his mom was lost and he didn't know where she was, but his Uncle John knew.
Yeah, that was strange. Who the heck is Uncle John?
Well, it's one of the brothers. There are three brothers. Josh, John, and Michael.
Oh, I didn't know there was another brother.
Yes, there is another brother. And so John, I guess.
Oh.
We'll have to do some research to see if John is still alive.
Yeah, because they don't really talk much about him. Yeah.
Yeah. I know he was in a mental institution, I believe we heard in earlier episodes.
That's right. Yeah. Now I remember.
Yeah.
But I knew about the sister who was totally devoted to the father. Mm-hmm. And, when Jennifer had that confrontation with them at the house, she was totally supporting the father.
Right, and saying to Jennifer, you don't do anything.
Right.
So they did say, like you said, that Charlie said things were a secret, and they did finally ask Charlie, who told you that they're a secret to keep secrets? And he did say his father. He said his father told him to tell secrets.
Right, and isn't this also the time he said his brain?
Yes.
His brain told him.
So he's talking about,
Yeah.
That's how, and like I said in our previous video, who's the brain? Does his father say he's his brain?
Right, or maybe that's his way of saying...
His father.
Or I'm remembering what my father told me.
Yes.
My brain told me.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah. And then when they were driving the kids home, Charlie was in the back with his brother and his grandmother, Teresa, and he saw where they were going, that they were going back to the house, and the detectives say that Charlie his demeanor just totally changed. And he was like, well, I'm just going to tell my dad that I was with a friend, that I was with friends. Like, it was so sad that he felt like he had to...
Be careful.
Yeah.
He had to be careful of what he was saying.
And who knows how he got grilled when he got home.
Right. And apparently he did, when he got home, ran right up to his father and said, I was with friends.
Yeah.
So they put the fear of God into him
For sure.
with whatever they were telling him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, poor little guy. It's
Yeah.
just heartbreaking.
So that was basically, anything else that you...
I don't think so. I think that's really...
Yeah, we pretty
Really
much
it.
summed up everything they talked about in there. Obviously, we do always tell you you should listen to the podcast because they do go into more detail, and you do hear the interview, well, the tapes and the interviews sometimes.
Right. You hear the actual people speaking.
Right.
The actual characters in this whole story.
Yep.
So it's pretty interesting, and you do hear that confrontation with her father and her sister.
You hear it all.
You hear it all, and they're all talking. It's a little
It's hard to hear. But Dave does tell you what they're basically saying.
Yeah, but it's very interesting, and you know, I keep saying that if you haven't listened to this podcast, you should.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
It gives
It's
you a lot
well worth it.
Yeah, a lot more information than we can convey is on these podcasts.
Yeah, and Dave's a wonderful storyteller.
He is. Definitely.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for, I got it wrong, episode 8. Next is episode 9. So until next time, right?
Right.
Bye.
Bye.